People will do anything for a viral moment these days, but these TikTok-induced incidents, they didn't just fail, they turned fatal. From a TikToker who climbed up a 250-foot crane in the dead of night to another who trusted a random TikTok fitness hack, destroying his body in the most agonizing way ever. It was the 8th of June, 2022, in Riga, Latvia. A tall structure in the city was the center of a plan that no one would think to question until it was far too late. Emil Zvaska was 22 years old and worked as a warehouse picker. A steady but unremarkable job he treated as a placeholder for something bigger. He had started posting on social media only months earlier, uploading whatever caught his attention that week: meals, his neighbor's dog, a weekend trip to the coast. Nothing consistent, nothing that gained real traction. According to his friend Tom Zeglis, after watching several videos of climbers scaling cranes for sunrise footage, he became inspired to make his own version of it. He brought Tom's, 21. Now, Tom's wasn't chasing an audience a little bit like Emil's was. He came along because his friend asked him to. Neither of them mentioned the plan to anyone beforehand. I want you to take note of that detail because it meant no one expected to hear from them until morning, and no one thought to worry when they didn't. At around 3:45 in the morning, the two slipped through a damaged section of the perimeter fence. The crane's ladder and access platforms climbed roughly 250 feet to the operator's cabin, rung after rung of galvanized steel coated with a thin film of overnight dew that made the metal especially slippery, something neither of them accounted for. They climbed steadily, talking in low voices, Tom's several rungs below, Emil's leading. I can practically feel that dew under my own fingers. And I'm telling you right now, that alone should have been their sign to stop. According to Tom's statement later, near the top, close enough to the operator's cabin that the city lights had started to separate from the horizon and individual streets and buildings were becoming visible beneath them, Emil's paused on the ladder and shifted his weight to reposition his phone for the shot. He had been climbing steadily for several minutes without incident, carefully keeping the phone in one hand while maintaining 3 points of contact whenever he could. But as he adjusted his grip to frame the skyline, he briefly committed more of his weight to a single foothold. He let go with one hand. His foot came down on a rung slick with dew that had condensed during the cool night air, and it slid out from under him instantly. No warning creak, no hesitation, no chance to recover his balance, just gone. His body pitched backward away from the ladder. He grabbed desperately for the steel rails with his free hand and then the other, but both missed by inches as momentum carried him into open air. Tom said afterward that there was no scream at first, only the sharp metallic sound of contact, repeated over and over as Emil struck several of the crane's steel cross members on the way down. Each impact changed his direction slightly before gravity pulled him into the next section of the structure until he finally landed on the compacted gravel more than 250 feet below. Tom's did not move for a long time. He said later that his hands stopped working, that he understood he needed to climb down and could not make his body do it. His phone slipped from his hand and fell before he even registered he was still holding it. Honestly, I don't know if I'd move either. I think I'd just freeze and replay that sound in my head forever. A crane operator arriving for the morning shift a few hours later spotted him still clinging to the structure, unmoving, and called emergency services immediately. Paramedics reached the site. Firefighters spent nearly 2 hours climbing to him, securing him with rescue equipment, and assisting him down section by section, since he could not descend under his own power. The coroner's report listed Emil's cause of death as massive blunt force trauma with partial traumatic amputation, consistent with a high-velocity fall through multiple rigid structures before impact with the ground. Nothing about it required elaboration for the family to understand what had happened. Tom's did not return to his apprenticeship for several months, and the two people who worked closest to him at the garage said he rarely discussed that night, even when asked directly. I don't think Emil's climbed that crane looking for anything more than a good shot, and I think that's exactly the point. The ordinary reasons are usually the ones that end this way. As Emil's chased a sunrise shot that would end his life, the next victim never even used the TikTok app before content made in mere seconds took her life instead. It was November 30, 2023, at a shopping complex on the outskirts of Campinas, Brazil, on a Thursday afternoon when the atrium was packed with hundreds of shoppers and nobody walking through the main doors that day had any reason to think the next 10 minutes would be the last 10 minutes of someone's life. Juanita Pancho was 61 years old, a retired elementary school teacher who had spent 32 years in the same classroom before stepping back to enjoy time with her grandchildren. The fact of sharing those quiet years makes me sad, knowing how this ends. That Saturday, she was shopping with her adult daughter, picking out a birthday gift and browsing a few stores before planning to stop for lunch. They moved at their usual, unhurried pace through the crowded walkway near the food court, occasionally stopping to look at displays as families, teenagers, and other weekend shoppers passed in every direction. There was nothing unusual about her decision to be there. It was a normal weekend errand, the kind of outing she had done hundreds of times over the years without giving safety a second thought. However, 4 young men, none of them older than 20, had decided that afternoon was the moment to film themselves faking an active shooter scene for a TikTok prank.
I think about how casually that decision was made, probably over a phone screen the night before, with no consideration for who would be standing nearby.
The 4 had positioned themselves near the atrium's central escalators, where the acoustics would carry sound upward through 3 open floors and maximize how far the noise traveled. They had chosen the location specifically because hundreds of shoppers moved through the area every few minutes, with people entering from multiple corridors and restaurants overlooking the open space. They set off 5 small firecrackers in quick succession. The pops were sharp and close together, loud enough to bounce off the tile and glass and echo throughout the atrium. One of them immediately screamed that someone was shooting. Another dropped to the ground and scrambled behind a planter while holding up his phone, filming the reaction around him as confused shoppers turned toward the noise. Within seconds, people who had heard only the shouting and the echoes began running without knowing what had actually happened, and the movement spread rapidly from one group to the next.
I don't think they understood, even for a second, what that sound does to hundreds of shoppers in an enclosed space.
The reaction was immediate. Shoppers near the escalators turned and ran, and within seconds the panic spread in every direction as people reacted to the shouted warning before knowing what had happened. About 30 feet from the nearest exit corridor, Juanita was knocked off balance when someone clipped her shoulder, sending her face first onto the polished tile as her daughter's hand slipped from hers. What followed lasted several agonizing seconds. With no room to slow or change direction, people continued surging over the crowded walkway. Witnesses said those behind had little chance of seeing Juanita on the ground before reaching her, and she was repeatedly stepped on as the crowd was carried forward by the momentum behind it. Her daughter was pushed several feet away in the same surge and could not get back to her for close to a minute. By the time the walkway cleared enough for people to see the ground clearly, Juanita was not moving. Bystanders said her breathing had gone shallow and irregular, then stopped being audible at all. Several shoppers and at least 2 children nearby had also been knocked down and sustained injuries during the same stampede, though none as severe. 60 seconds of being shoved away from your mom while she's being crushed? I can't even fathom that kind of helplessness. Paramedics arrived and attempted resuscitation on site, but Juanita was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner's report listed the cause of death as multiple blunt force injuries to the head and torso. Footage from at least 6 different phones and security cameras captured different portions of the incident, including the 4 young men attempting to flee the atrium before mall security caught up with and detained them outside. All 4 were later criminally charged. As someone who has a soft spot for elders, this infuriates me. I don't know what any of them expected to get out of that video, but I know it wasn't this. Juanita never chased a viral moment, she was buried by someone else's. And our next victim shows the same content-chasing recklessness cuts both ways. Sometimes it's the crowd that turns deadly, and sometimes it's the chase itself. It was August 14th, 2021, near a busy roundabout in the Westlands area of Nairobi, Kenya. Mid-morning, stop-start, utterly unremarkable, until a split-second decision turned the air solid. Ask yourself, when was the last time you chased something without looking first? Niamugo was 24 years old and worked as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic, a job she balanced alongside a growing hobby of filming short TikTok dance clips around recognizable Nairobi landmarks.
The classic side hustle meets main hustle, except TikTok fame doesn't come with hazard pay.
That morning, she had come to the roundabout, probably for the backdrop, the traffic, the signage, the movement behind her, and had set up a small tripod on the sidewalk to hold her phone steady while she recorded. She had used that spot before without incident, which is probably part of why she didn't think twice about setting up so close to moving traffic again. Mid-recording, 2 men ran past her at speed, one of them grabbing the tripod and phone in a single motion without slowing down. Nia reacted almost instantly, reaching after the tripod as it slipped from her grasp and starting after them on foot. Witnesses said she didn't pause, didn't look toward the road, didn't seem to weigh the decision at all.
I can't even judge her for that nowadays. Your phone's got your whole life on it, and in that split second, your arm moves before your brain gets a vote.
One of the two men cut directly through a gap in stalled traffic, weaving between two cars that had paused at the roundabout entrance. Nia followed within a few feet of him, focused entirely on keeping pace, her eyes on his back rather than the lanes opening up around her. Drivers nearby had already begun easing forward as the light cycle shifted, the kind of gradual acceleration that drivers barely register as motion until it isn't gradual anymore. An SUV entering the roundabout from the side lane accelerated through the gap the two men had just cleared. The driver told police afterward that he saw movement half a second before impact. Not enough time to identify what it was, only enough time to brake. The vehicle's speed was around 30 miles per hour at the moment of contact. Nia was struck directly, her body lifted off the ground and carried briefly across the hood before striking the windshield. She then rolled off the side of the vehicle and landed on the pavement, head first, after falling from the height of the hood.
It's wild how uncinematic real life is. No slow motion, no dramatic score, just a thud, and everything changes.
A pool of blood formed quickly beneath her head. The driver got out of the vehicle within seconds, and several witnesses described him as visibly shaking, repeating that he hadn't seen her. My stomach sinks for that guy he was just driving to work or running an errand, and now he's got to live with that replaying in his head every single night. Motorcycle taxi riders stationed near the roundabout were the first to reach her, and one of them called emergency services almost immediately. Paramedics pronounced her dead at the scene minutes later. To make matters worse, the two men who took the phone were never identified or recovered. No charges were filed against the driver, who was found to have had the right of way. When I zoom out on the whole thing, it just breaks my heart in a quiet way. A girl loses her life over a gadget, a driver gets traumatized for no fault of his own, and two desperate guys probably sold that phone for pocket change without ever knowing the chaos they left behind. Now, if Nia's fatal instinct was to chase what she'd lost, our next victim's fatal instinct was to chase a laugh towed on a table like a stunt with no safety net. It was May 1, 2020, on a quiet residential road in a subdivision in Batangas Province, Philippines. There was nothing out of the ordinary about the scene, except for the fact that the laughter echoing down the street had no idea it was about to be cut short. Jarek Dima was 17 years old, a senior high school student known among his classmates for his TikTok comedy sketches, the kind he and his friends filmed after class. They said that he had a habit of committing fully to a bit once the camera was rolling, and his friends said he rarely backed out of a stunt once it was set up.
I was that kid too. The one who'd do anything for a laugh. Because at 17, consequences feel like someone else's problem.
He and 3 classmates had spent the week watching homemade towing videos. The sort where someone gets dragged behind a car on something absurd, and they decided their version would involve a folding table.
As a Jackass fan, I can't even pretend I wouldn't have found that hilarious back then.
They picked the subdivision road because it was flat, straight, and likely to have very little traffic that time of day. It offered a long stretch of pavement without intersections or sharp turns, making it seem like the safest place to attempt the stunt. Jarek volunteered to ride the table without much discussion. He appeared confident rather than hesitant, likely trusting his friends' driving and believing the risk was manageable because they had pulled off smaller towing stunts before without incident. None of them seemed to consider how much more unstable a lightweight plastic table would become once it was pulled at higher speeds over ordinary pavement. The plan itself was simple enough that none of them likely treated it as dangerous. A rope tied to the rear bumper, a plastic folding table flipped upside down, Jarek lying face down on it, gripping the metal legs for balance. The driver, a classmate his own age, eased the compact sedan forward, first at a crawl, then faster, while a third passenger filmed through the open rear window. There was no helmet, no pads, nothing beyond the 4 of them agreeing it looked like a good idea on a screen a few nights earlier. No helmet, no pads, no second thoughts, just 4 kids and a rope. The sedan reached roughly 35 miles an hour on the straight stretch before the road curved. Jarek was laughing audibly on the video recovered afterward, his grip loose, his weight shifting with the sway of the table beneath him.
35 miles per hour on a piece of cheap plastic. I'm wincing just imagining that wobble because you don't feel how fast that is until the ground starts fighting back.
As the sedan rounded the bend, the rope jerked sideways, and the table's trajectory broke from the car's path in a way none of them had accounted for. It began fishtailing, first in a shallow arc, then violently, the plastic surface skating sideways across the asphalt with Jarek still clinging to the legs. Witnesses on nearby porches said the table seemed to tip onto its edge almost in slow motion, one side lifting while the other scraped the road, and then it simply flipped. Jarek was thrown head first, and there was no arc to his fall, no cushioning moment. He struck the rear quarter panel of a parked SUV sitting along the roadside directly. His skull met the steel body panel with the kind of force that does not need repetition to be understood, and his body slid beneath the parked vehicle afterward, motionless. The passengers in the sedan were screaming before the car had even fully stopped, and the driver left the vehicle in the middle of the road as he ran toward his friend. A nearby homeowner, drawn out by the screaming, called emergency services immediately. Jarek was unresponsive at the scene, and the injuries were severe enough that even a faster response likely would not have changed the outcome. He was transported to a hospital and died shortly after arrival. The teenage driver was later charged with reckless imprudence, resulting in homicide. The subdivision installed no new signage because there was nothing structurally wrong with the road, only a decision made by 4 teenagers with a camera and no sense of where the line actually was. When I step back and look at the whole mess, it's not about a road or a rope or a table, it's about how we glorify dumb stunts online until reality crashes in. Jarek's death happened in seconds, over before anyone could even process it. Our next TikTokers took days, which meant his mother had to watch it happen in slow motion instead. It was February 11th, 2021, in a quiet residential neighborhood on the outskirts of Ponce, Puerto Rico. A phone was propped against a porch railing, set to record, and the final countdown to a life-altering mistake had already begun in a quiet neighborhood where nothing ever happened. Kaylin Ortiz was 18 years old, a senior at a local high school known more for showing up than standing out. He had a small following online, a few hundred people at most, and a habit of recreating whatever trend was circulating that week regardless of how it performed typical TikTok teen. He was alone that afternoon, as he usually was, between school and his mother's return from her shift, and he had likely decided this would be the day he finally posted something that moved. According to his classmates, he had watched other versions of the challenge online, ones where the flame lasted a second, maybe 2, before being smothered with a towel already staged nearby. What he had, instead, was gasoline poured from a container kept for the family's lawn equipment in the shed. Investigators speculated that he mistakenly believed it would behave like the rubbing alcohol in the videos he had watched, flaring briefly before burning itself out. I can't get over how a simple Google search or a second thought could have saved him, but we don't think when we're chasing clout. He poured it across his shirt and down both forearms, more than the videos showed, though he had no real way of judging how much was too much. He set his phone up to record, counted down out loud the way he'd seen others do it, and struck the lighter close to his chest. There was no pause between spark and flame. Gasoline vapor does not wait to be invited. It was already in the air around him before the lighter even made contact. That lighter spark feels like a split-second decision that I've made 1,000 times, except this time the universe said no in the worst way. The fire did not climb his shirt the way a candle climbs a wick. It surrounded his entire torso at once, then reached his face and his hair within the same second. Neighbors later said they heard him a short, sharp sound that did not immediately register as human. He ran. Every instinct in him likely said to move, and every instinct was wrong, because running likely forced more air across the burning fuel and clothing, making the flames burn even more intensely. A neighbor 2 houses down said she saw him through her window, a shape moving fast and wrong across the yard, and she did not understand what she was looking at until the shape went down. His mother came home minutes later.
I don't think there's a way to describe what she found that doesn't feel like an intrusion into something that should have stayed private. So I won't try beyond the facts.
He was collapsed near the front door, and the burns covered most of his body by the time anyone reached him. She called for help immediately, her voice reportedly barely coherent to the dispatcher. Paramedics arrived swiftly, and it still was not fast enough to undo what had already happened in the time it took the fire to do its work. He was transported to a regional burn unit and died 3 days later. His mother held a small service attended mostly by classmates and neighbors. Investigators concluded there was no evidence of foul play, and the case was ultimately treated as an accidental accidental death stemming from the failed social media challenge. Can you imagine that scenario? A single mom working her tail off, trusting her kid to be okay for a few hours with TikTok and a teen brain. I'm furious and heartbroken that she has to bury her son because nobody was there to say stop. Fire took Keelan in minutes, but the next teen's danger came from something he swallowed, not something he lit. It was October 3rd, 2022, in a residential apartment block in Suzhou, China, where the kitchen light stayed on longer than usual that night, and nobody in the building would have guessed that a bottle of water sitting on the counter was the reason. Shen Rui was 20 years old, a college student studying mechanical engineering, known among classmates as someone who took fitness seriously and approached it with an almost obsessive level of discipline. He had spent the past several months watching fitness TikTok videos online, the kind that promised faster recovery and better performance through cheap homemade mixtures. His parents described him as eager, private about his hobbies, and confident that he understood more about supplements than he actually did. He had no formal guidance, no nutritionist, no doctor he consulted. What he had was a phone, a stack of saved videos, and a father who kept a well-stocked medicine cabinet.
Honestly, I get wanting a shortcut, but trusting random internet gurus over actual science, that's a recipe I'd never touch with a 10-foot pole.
That evening, Rui apparently went looking for ingredients the way someone follows a recipe they trust completely. He found a bag of potassium chloride, salt substitute, magnesium tablets, table salt, baking soda, a container of sports drink mix, and several vitamin tablets he crushed by hand. He used far more of the potassium salt substitute than anyone would normally consume, believing more would make the drink more effective. He mixed them into a single bottle of water. He didn't measure anything precisely, because the videos he had watched didn't either. And this is where I lose it, eyeballing supplements like you're seasoning a steak. That's not confidence, that's a death wish in disguise. Investigators are almost certain he drank nearly the entire bottle in one sitting, and within the hour, he told his mother his mouth and fingers felt strange, a tingling that wouldn't go away. He said his stomach hurt. He vomited twice in the bathroom, then a third time. His mother assumed it was something he ate and told him to take antacids. His weakness became more obvious over the next 20 minutes. He tried to stand from the couch to get to his room, and his knees buckled beneath him, the weakness coming on so suddenly that he could no longer keep himself upright. His father caught him partway down. That's the detail that stays with me most. Not the collapse itself, but the fact that his body had been fine enough to complain about symptoms only moments before it simply stopped cooperating. His arms and legs became profoundly weak, and his eyes rolled before closing. His mother screamed his name repeatedly, getting no response. His father, kneeling on the floor beside him, felt for a pulse and found something irregular. Fast, and then suddenly not fast at all. He began CPR the way he remembered it from a workplace training years earlier, counting compressions out loud in the empty apartment while his wife dialed emergency services with hands that would not stay still. I can't picture a more helpless moment than pumping your son's chest while your wife's hands shake on the phone. That image is gonna haunt me. The paramedics arrived within 10 minutes. They took over compressions immediately, attached a monitor that showed a heart rhythm no longer capable of sustaining circulation, and continued resuscitation efforts during the ride to the hospital. Rui never regained a pulse. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The forensic examination concluded that the combination of a massive amount of potassium from the potassium chloride salt substitute, magnesium, sodium, and additional additives overwhelmed his body's electrolyte balance to a degree his heart could not tolerate. The massive amount of potassium in the mixture quickly overwhelmed his body's ability to regulate its electrolyte balance. The excess potassium disrupted the electrical signals that keep the heart beating normally, leading to a fatal heart rhythm before his body could recover. In the weeks that followed, his parents removed every supplement from their home. His mother later told a family friend that she wished she had asked more questions about the fitness advice he followed online instead of assuming he knew what he was doing. The university held a brief memorial gathering, attended mostly by classmates who hadn't fully understood how a healthy 20-year-old could be gone within a single evening. His parents' regret is gut-wrenching.
We've created a generation that treats health like a DIY TikTok project, and more lives will be lost if every online life hack is taken at face value.